good nap. Editor's cam here, guys, at the beginning of the video because the original intro was just terrible. So, if you're new here, welcome, and it'd be cool if you subscribed if you enjoy this video. If you're coming back, I have no idea how that's possible because I haven't posted in like 2 years. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Today we're going to be learning about English translations of the Bible, not paraphrases and not just versions of the Bible. For example, the New King James Version is not a translation, it is a version of the King James Bible. So the King James translation was just modified in English. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the translation process, who did it the best, basically, and which ones to stay away from is the main point of this video. We are also not going to be talking about the history of where the Bible came from in this video, the original Hebrew and Greek transcripts, so there will be a link in the description for more information on that. If that is what you are interested in, this is not the video for you. Just simply English translations of the Bible. So the whole reason I came with the idea to make this video is because of a translation called TPT version of the Bible. And a great aunt of mine and one of my grandmothers was looking into buying a couple of these Bibles, and they told me about them, saying that they were direct translations from the Hebrew, which was interesting to me because I didn't know very much about it, but I just thought, wouldn't they all have come from Hebrew? But I wasn't sure. I really just didn't know about it enough. So I decided to dig into this, and I found a lot of red flags on this version right away. So let us begin. A guy named Brian Simmons claimed to have a vision where an angel named Passion taught him secrets of the Hebrew and Greek language that gave him new insight, meaning, and revelation of the Word of God, and that Jesus himself took him to the library of heaven, and Jesus commissioned him to write this version, and also commissioned him to write a brand new chapter to the book of John. He began his own translation of the Bible, claiming that it is of divine inspiration. There are obviously many red flags here, as all the trusted translations of the Bible are done by a large committee, not one person who can inject his own personal bias into every word. And just the whole Joseph Smith vibe of a vision and an angel named Passion. But if that wasn't enough for you, this translation has about 50% more words than all the major translations do, which are almost all just an insane amount of hyper-charismatic lingo that will often completely change the meaning of a passage. I really wonder how he was able to write down the last few verses of Revelation. And if that still isn't enough for you, he has straight out lied about his credentials, claiming to have helped translate Bibles to the Kuna translation with an organization called New Tribes, now known as Ethnos 360, which this organization claims that he did no such thing. He also releases the Bible book by book as he finishes rewriting them, which is a terrific marketing plan for continuing to get money from his followers. So there are obviously a lot of issues with this translation, which made me just think about all the other translations and where they came from and how trustworthy they are, figuring that, millions of people base their entire lives off of these books. And it also troubled me that this version was on the YouVersion Bible app, which is a Bible app that I personally use and a lot of people that I know use. And I actually used this Bible translation for a short period of time and almost somewhat liked it, but I did not know, it was on the YouVersion Bible app, and I tried it and kind of liked it, but I didn't know all of this sort of dark history about it. So, this embarked me on a journey to give you a quick rundown of all the Bible translations on the YouVersion Bible app, and which ones you should use and which ones you shouldn't. And I would honestly just kind of like to say a message to the YouVersion Bible app to kind of clean their act up on versions like this, which there aren't many. Honestly, this is by far the worst one. And most of them I am okay with people using as long as they use it along with other translations. But this one you should completely cut out from all of your circles, completely, 100%. The American Standard Version, also known as the ASV, or the newer revision of this is the NASB, which is much more commonly used because it's newer English. It is a word-for-word translation. It was made by a national council of churches of many different beliefs. This is perhaps the most trusted Bible version there is, as far as word-for-word translation goes, and is just very well known as being very sound, and they were very transparent about how they translated it. This gets a big check mark from me. There will be two different types of translation methods that we will be talking about today. There is word-for-word translation, and there is also thought-for-thought translation. Both methods are good in my opinion, but you must use a word-for-word translation and a thought-for-thought translation together to make sure there aren't any holes. But you cannot translate a Bible using word for word and thought for thought in your translation, because then it allows for people to be able to tweak it however they want to in a place where they don't agree with the idea of the thought for thought, and then they can change it to word for word if it helps their agenda. So that is why you should stick to thought for thought or word for word when translating, and just use, since we have so many different English versions, just use both different English versions side by side in your reading or Bible studies. The Common English Bible is a thought-for-thought translation, made to be easy reading, and it may be good for children or foreigners. It was translated by a large council, but perhaps too large. One of the translators of the first draft, named Richard Hayes, somewhat critiqued this in saying, "In an effort to achieve readability, it has not only sacrificed Paul's stylistic elegance, but also subtly obscured the letter's theological coherence and key points. It has domesticated Paul's gospel by muting its apocalyptic notes, dulling its sharp emphasis on the priority of God's action in Christ to effect the justification of humanity, and reducing its rhetorical grandeur to a casual plodding discourse." But I don't see any problem with this version, especially in use with other versions, so this gets a big check mark from me. The CEV, the Contemporary English Version, more than 100 in translation process. Probably one of the best easy-to-read versions. It is graphic and harsh, but sometimes too much. The only major problem I see with this is that the word repent is replaced by turn back to God, which makes a pretty large change in the meaning of scriptures. For example, Romans 3:10. But overall, this is a good version. It gets a check mark from me. The ESV. There were more than 100 people translating this. It is a word-for-word translation. It gets a check mark from me. Free Bible version. This is only the New Testament. The idea of this was to make a Bible version that is completely free to use with no copyright. But the thing is that most Bible versions are that way. Definitely not the King James, which we will get into later, but the majority of Bible versions are free to use online and such. This was translated by one person, Dr. Jonathan Gallagher. So since this is one person, it is pretty sketchy. He does have notes and commentary next to the Bible in this version that are of personal opinion versus options. It is an easy reading version, so pretty much thought for thought. And I just couldn't find much information on this except for one interview of him, which is very low quality. So since this is one person that translated this gets an X from me because that's just a major red flag for any version for it to be translated by one person. And there are just so many other versions for us to use out there that there's no reason to use this Bible. So the free Bible version gets an X from me. Today's English version, or also known as the Good News Bible or the Good News Translation, it is thought for thought, gets general salvation across, but is really too dynamic for me. There's also some mistakes, for example, Romans 8:3. Also not transparent on the translation process. There's not a whole lot of information you can get on that. So I would avoid this one in general. It was a large group of people that made this, but you just kind of get a bad vibe from it. So this kind of gets from me. Now we really get to get into the fun stuff. The Geneva Bible. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of history on this translation of the Bible. Very long story short, the Church of England was trying to control the population and Christianity and what everyone believed in. And there were some people that weren't too fond of that, also known as the Reformers. And the leader of the Reform, was John Calvin. Henry VIII was King of England at the time, and he basically told John Calvin, hey, if you don't stop disagreeing with the church and teaching against the church, then we're going to kill you. And so John Calvin said, bye, sucker, I'm going to Switzerland. And so then he decided to make a translation and got some other reformers that were good at translating. Not totally sure how they got copies of the Textus Receptus, but they did. I assume they brought them from England, and they translated the Bible. So John Calvin headed over this Bible, and it was basically the first Bible ever made in the format we have today, with verses and chapters and things like that. Those were not numbered before. This was 51 years before the King James Version. It was taken to America on the Mayflower. It was the first mechanically printed Bible that was spread to the public. So this was a very big deal. It was the second English version ever published, and it was the very first translation, direct English translation of the Bible from Greek and Hebrew. All the other translations were translations of translations. The other translation was a translation of a translation, which was the German translation of the Textus Receptus. This is a very trustworthy translation, one of the best translations there are, and I trust it more than the King James Version. It is very Old English, and so it is quite difficult to read, but this is a very trustworthy translation and is good to use with other translations. It is a word-for-word translation, and this gets a big check mark from me. So remember how I was talking about England and the Church of England trying to take over Christianity as a whole and trying to control it? Well, the Geneva Bible made that very difficult to do, as you can imagine. There was a man by the name of King James. Perhaps you've heard of him. And he decided to make a Bible. Pretty much the sole purpose of this was to outsell the Geneva Bible. So anytime you purchase a King James Bible or use a certain amount of words from the King James Bible, there is a copyright fee which goes directly to the Crown of England to this day, so that the church could regain control over the Bible. There was a lot of controversial history on this, so I would suggest you just study it yourself, but this is the gist of what I got out of searching this. It was created to outsell the Geneva Bible, and it was printed in a cheaper fashion, and it was cheaper to buy, so it was more easily widespread. And so they marketed it very well. About 70% of the King James New Testament is verbatim of the Tyndale Bible. There is no question that there is some bias in the King James Version of the Bible. King James gave the translators instructions intended to guarantee that the new version would reflect the beliefs of the Church of England. Overall, this is a pretty good version of the Bible. Although there are many people that claim there are many King James only believing people, this is basically just an ignorant view of this, in my opinion. I've heard people say that other versions of the Bible were just made to try to profit off of the Bible, which is a completely invalid argument because, as we mentioned earlier, there are many versions of the Bible that are free to use. Also, that is the reason that the King James Version of the Bible was made, pretty much, was to outsell the Geneva Bible and control the market on it and control the political power of the reformers. And there is no question of there being bias in the King James Version of the Bible as far as predestination and sprinkling and pouring and baptism, in the way that they translated those words in Hebrew are very clearly altered. They also translated the word disobey as believe not, which is a big problem I have with this translation, which majorly changes the way that this is read. And there's just also a large faith-only bias, as what we would call a Calvinistic bias nowadays. But it's interesting because that's actually what the Church of England was teaching at that time, was predestination and a faith-only gospel, no, not works. And so I always thought that John Calvin's teachings were somewhat a reaction to the Church of England at that time, but I was wrong. It's actually that he was teaching a lot of what the Church of England was teaching already. So that's very interesting. I learned that is a brand new thing that I learned that I had no idea about. So honestly, the King James Version gets an from me. It's good to use with other translations, but I would just like to see us move away from this version in general, as it is by far the most popular version of the Bible, but there are some major flaws with it. And yeah, so that's the end of the King James Version. God's Word is a thought-for-thought translation. There was a large panel of people that created this, and this is probably my favorite easy-to-read version. It's just a very good one. This gets a big check mark for me. Holman Christian Standard Bible is a word-for-word translation created by a large panel of people from many different denominations. It is basically the pre-CSB version of the Bible. This gets a big check mark for me. The International Children's Bible is a good children's translation. There are footnotes for parents at questionable translation points, so this gets a big check mark for me. The Jubilee Bible, similar to the King James Version in the way that it is written, but this is very sketchy to me. I can't find any info on it, except for on their website, which the PDF, you have to download a PDF file to read the About page, and the computer I was using wouldn't even allow me to open this, so there was either a problem with the file or a problem with my computer or something. So I couldn't find much other information on this except for in one review, which was very short and seemed highly biased. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then a review I found on Amazon underneath where you could buy this Bible. That's how deep I searched looking for information on this. And this was all I could find. No red lettering. It is Old English. This is a word-for-word translation. But this is a quote from the website itself. The Jubilee Bible website itself. The Jubilee Bible is written so the reader does not need to depend on theological dictionaries or reference materials. That is not a statement that I like to hear. I would like to hear them suggesting that you use it together with other Bibles. So This really gets an X from me because I can't find much information on it, and so there are so many other better versions out there that I would just stay away from this version in general. The Lexham English Bible is a word-for-word translation, and it is very good. This gets a check mark for me. The Modern English Version is basically an update of the King James Version. There was a little bit of translation going on during this, so I consider it a translation. It's a little different than the New King James, where they just used the English version and modified it. But it's basically the New King James while using the Hebrew and Greek as notes in a way. So this is pretty good. It gets check mark for me. The New American Bible, not to be confused with the New American Standard Bible or the NASB as we talked about earlier. The New American Bible was created by the Vatican, and it's just very inconsistent. I mean, it would be an okay Bible to use if you were like closed in a cage without another Bible, but it is just inconsistent in the way they translated it. It's not insanely influenced, but I would stay away from it in general. This gets an from me. This is not good. New Century Version is an easy to read version. No complaints. This is a good version. This gets a check mark for me. The New English Translation. The notes are open to the public. They're very transparent about how they did it. It is a thought-for-thought version. Very formal. Not intended to be easy to read. One of the few thought-for-thought versions that is not easy to read, but it is very good. This gets a check mark from me. The Plain English Version is designed for Aboriginal people whose second language is English. This is an incomplete Bible. It's still in the translation process, and so I can't get very much information on this either. This gets an from me, not an X, as there are a lot of people translating it, and I can't find any problems in the version as much of the version that we have out right now. But I don't see any reason for us in America to be using this for any reason right now. So I would just stay away from this one in general for now as well, until it gets finished and until we can get more information on how it was translated. It could be good for Aboriginal people right now, but I'm completely unaware of that culture, so I am not going to speak on that. The Radiate New Testament. This only exists on the YouVersion Bible app, and I can't find any information on it at all, except here on the app, and which was basically nothing. So this gets an X from me, as I can't find anything on it, and it's only on the YouVersion Bible app. So I would stay away from this. The Tree of Life version, created by Jews for Jews. It is a word-for-word translation. It is very good. Bing. Young's literal translation is very literal, as you can see from the title. It could be very good in use with other Bibles, but it's quite difficult to read, and it is also individually translated. Although up against other Bibles, this is a very consistently written Bible, and it looks very good compared to all the other single-person translated Bibles. But since it was one person, this is definitely an from me. Maybe even an X. I'm kind of in the middle there. But there aren't major problems with one. If you used it with other Bibles, there's not a large problem with me for you using this. But I certainly would not use it as your main reader. The Scriptures. Gives you very Hebrew vibes, Hebrew names, and things like that. Like in the genealogies and things like that, they use the actual Hebrew names, and they use, Yahweh and Jehovah, and it's just a very Hebrew vibe you get from this. Is a word-for-word translation done by a large group of people. This looks very good to me. This gets a check mark from me. Drum roll, please. The New International Version, also known as the NIV, which I know all of you have been waiting to hear, which you probably all came to this video for. This was created by one church, and it is inconsistent in the translation style, as they translated it word for word and thought for thought, which is a problem for me. As I stated in the beginning of the video, this allows for a lot of bias. And there is also a very clear Calvinistic bias in this Bible. As I said, it was created by only one church. Unlike almost all the other versions we talked about, they used multiple different denominations to translate the Bible to ensure that it would not be biased. So this gets an from me. I really would not suggest the NIV. It is the most read English version in the past couple years, and I would like to see us move away from this version of the Bible also. I definitely would not suggest this for your primary reading source. If you use it in with other Bibles, it could be okay, but it's definitely an from me. So yeah. So long story short, just study the translation of the Bible that you're looking into reading or getting, and stay away from the TPT. And have a good day. So the point of this video is basically just to caution you to study the version of the Bible that you're looking into reading, and to warn you about some precarious versions. If you guys think I missed anything, those of you who have done this study before, or you are studying it now because I've gotten you interested in it, please let me know. I would love to hear info from you. Love to hear feedback. And I am of course not the supreme authority on this subject, so just study this yourself. I encourage you to. And that's kind of the point of this video, is to give you a quick guide to it and encourage you to study it yourself. So please do that. Say bye. Okay. So in conclusion, the main three Bible versions I would use is the NASB for word, the Good News Bible for easy to read thought for thought, and the New English Translation, or the NET, for just regular thought for thought.